Jai Sri Ram. As we all know, Bhakti Yoga is an integral part of Hinduism, especially in the last 1,000 years or so. But something that I've noticed is that there are some people who walk a spiritual path that have a kind of bias against Bhakti Yoga. And I personally was one of these people in the past too, regardless of whether I was on a spiritual path or just a materialist. And the reason for that is basically one thing that I see coming from a lot of people who are into Bhakti Yoga and the people that buy into this kind of negative stereotype, which is that it's overly emotional, because I think that a lot of its strongest proponents or most vocal proponents, at least in the modern day, tend to be kind of very emotionally expressive people. And so those of us who are not so deep into Bhakti Yoga kind of think, these are the kinds of people that get all these like emotional reactions from doing kirtan or whatever the case may be, and they want to have these involved kind of emotional experiences where they have darshan of their God, right? And I think that the reason that this is harmful to look at it this way is that many people don't really have an overly emotional kind of personality. I know I don't. And, men who are at least somewhat masculine generally don't. And people who are, fairly emotionally detached or trying to cultivate more emotionally detached kind of thinking and feeling tend to not be overly emotional. But Bhakti Yoga is not about human emotion, right? We have to draw a distinction between people who feel emotional attachments to their family members and friends and so on because of basic materialistic human reasons, and cultivating a kind of quote unquote emotional relationship with your Ishta Devata, because emotional relationships with real people in your life they're basically the same whether you're a Hindu or a non-Hindu, whether you're a spiritual person or whether you're a materialistic person. I mean, the way that people interact with their parents or their siblings or their friends or their spouse or children or whatever is basically the same regardless of who you are, what you believe, so on and so forth, right? Outside of some of the things surrounding values that we all know about sexual morality or family values and things of that nature, as far as your own internal emotional mental state, these kinds of bonds are very similar across people. But with Bhakti Yoga, you have opportunity is kind of a weird word, but you have the opportunity to basically cultivate the ideal relationship that you can with someone who is not a flesh and blood living person who is going to disappoint you. They're going to demand things from you. The relationship may be rocky at times, and so on and so forth, right? We all have been in very close relationships of various kinds with different people in our life, and it's to some degree they're not totally stable relationships, and they're not providing us only with happiness. They're providing us with, a whole host of different things, most of which are just kind of tying you up in this bond of obligation that you have towards another person or people, right? And so I think even for those of us who are not particularly emotionally attached or particularly emotionally expressive, this is definitely a spiritual path that we need to go down, and we need to incorporate these kinds of practices into our lives. I have been doing that for the past, few months or so, and I definitely see that there is positivity there. Also, I'd like to add that there are different modes or bhavas of bhakti yoga, which you may have heard listed out. Like there's madhurya bhav of like gopis with Krishna, and vatsalya bhav of Yashoda with Krishna, and sakhya bhav of Arjun and Krishna, and dasya bhav of Hanuman and Ram. And we always see these being likened to human relationships, right? We're seeing it likened to a romantic relationship to a parent and child relationship to a relationship of friends, a relationship of the servant and master, like the ones that I just listed out. And I think that the reason that this is actually a positive thing is that, or let me back up a second. There is a kind of knee-jerk reaction, I think, from a lot of people, especially those who are really into Jnana Yoga, that, because of Advaitin beliefs that they have, they see Saguna Brahman as being kind of lower than Nirguna Brahman, and they kind of think, well, people who are not into Jnana Yoga and reading the Upanishads and doing all of this Nididhyasana and all of this study, they need these images and personages of different gods in order to connect with that. But then once you get to a certain point, then you don't need that. And I think that, the main problem there is that in spirituality, what we are seeking is not information, right? We're not trying to really become more knowledgeable about the topic of adhyatmic things, right? In order to do that, you can just study a philosophy like other people study philosophies. I mean, there are people who are not Advaitins, but have studied Advaita Vedanta as just another philosophical school that they study because they're interested in philosophy, or they're a student of philosophy, or whatever the case may be, and they may be totally materialistic, or they maybe even buy into a different kind of spiritual worldview, but they're very knowledgeable about what Advaita is, even though they're not actually incorporating that into their lives, right? Now, in order to actually have spiritual experiences, you have to obviously be doing some kind of sadhana, which channeling your human emotions into a sadhana and putting yourself on a spiritual path that can actually channel those human traits that you have into something positive instead of trying to make you almost step away from them. And I'm not saying that that's what Jnana Yoga is. I'm saying that's something that I see a lot of people who are walking the path of Jnana Yoga doing. That you're really missing out on a large part of human experience. And also, you're missing out on a large part of using your own innate human nature in order to help yourself progress further. And it's not really possible to have deep feelings for something that's not human, or that you're not interacting with as a human. Obviously, people have lots of emotions surrounding their pets or cows or whatever the case may be, different animals, but something that is alive and animate that you're interacting with like a living person, that as a human being, that's of course something that we can feel a much more profound, much deeper sense of happiness and fulfillment with than we can these more generic things of like being outside in nature, even if it's very beautiful, or hearing the birds chirping and all of this kind of stuff. And so, I think that any human being really should do some kind of bhakti yoga practices if you're trying to become a more spiritual person. And we really need to understand that jnana yoga and bhakti yoga and raj yoga and all of these different things, they're not really different paths in the sense that people are dedicated 100% only to one and don't pursue the others at all. I think what you'll find in like the biographies of different holy personalities and so on is that these people had daily routines where they were doing all of these things. They were knowledgeable in scriptures, they were doing bhakti practices, they were doing some asanas and some pranayam, and they were obviously trying their best to cultivate a kind of nishkam karma kind of feeling towards karma yoga and all of that. So there is a kind of natural human flaw that we have, that we want to draw some kind of boundary around ourselves, and we want to see ourselves and what we're doing as being superior to what other people are doing. And I think that the difference between logical and fairly emotionally detached people versus people who are very emotionally expressive and attached, that kind of split, we need to be careful to understand that this is not a split that we can map onto Jnana Yoga and Bhakti Yoga because, one, those are things dealing with human. They're not dealing with human emotions and humans. They're dealing with spiritual matters. And two, these are not two warring factions that disagree with each other. They're all just parts of an actual spiritual path. So that's all I've got for you guys today. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Jai Shri Ram.